Hi, I'm Chike Coleman, and that's Sanford Hess. This is Rural Review's Home Edition, the show where we talk about movies from our homes. This week, we're going to be spotlighting actor Chadwick Boseman in two films that should be a part of everybody's Black History Month video library. The first of which is 42. And I'm going to have Sanford summarize the plot of 42.
All right. Well, this won't take too long because 42 is the story of Jackie Robinson, as played by Chadwick Boseman. But really, it's a very, I would say, a very specific chunk of Jackie Robinson's life, and it actually kind of glosses over a lot of the other part. So 42 opens, and we learn that a general manager of the Brooklyn Dodgers, who goes by the name of Branch Rickey, is looking to bring over some players from the Negro Leagues. And he's decided to do this both because he wants to win games and also an acknowledgement that this is going to increase the turnout from the black audience to their games. So we learn from that point that he's looking at several different players, and one of the recommendations from his team is Jackie Robinson. Now, Jackie Robinson is playing currently on one of the Negro Leagues teams that's traveling around and playing, but he gets the tap to come up and meet Branch Rickey, who interviews him in one of the crucial scenes of the movie. And one of the fundamental things about this is that they're looking not just for a skilled ball player, but also somebody who can put up with the derogatory language and all the other hassles that he's going to get being the first African American to play in the major leagues. Actually, ironically, I learned it's the second, but since the 1880s, the first one. So, Jackie Robinson agrees to that, and from that point forward, we're sort of told his story. Now, a lot of the movie actually takes place during his first year in the major leagues. And primarily that begins with the spring training, which occurs first in Florida, which is still a segregated environment, and then moves on. And actually, he plays for the minor league team, which at the time was the Montreal Royals. So we see Jackie Robinson goes through some of those early phases. Then, as his career progresses and he's ready to be called up to the Dodgers, they actually go through spring training in Panama for various reasons.
Yes.
One of which is that it's not a lily white environment. And then of course the movie really takes flight when Jackie Robinson begins playing for the Dodgers in the major leagues. Now he puts up with overt racism and non-overt racism. He puts up with all kinds of negative attitudes from everybody, including his teammates. We see him rise past those things, and really the movie kind of culminates with his interaction with a couple of really bad, just really negative characters. And eventually, we learn that that season, the Dodgers make it to the World Series. They lost, unfortunately. But then in the after credits of the movie, we learn that he had a very successful career in the major leagues for many years. So 42 primarily focuses on just this early phase of his career and isn't so much of a full biopic about Jackie Robinson's whole life, really just more about his initial time with the team and his first year in the majors. Chike, let me
Yes.
give you my quick thoughts about this movie,
Okay.
and then I'm going to throw it over to you. Chadwick Boseman's performance is impressive because it's a very restrained performance. Unlike another performance that we'll talk about in about 12 minutes, his job as Jackie Robinson, because the reason that Jackie Robinson was really became selected as the first person to go through this process is that he keeps everything inside. And as an actor, that's a hard thing to show, but I think he gives a very effective, restrained performance. At the same time, this movie to me is just one cliche too many about the baseball story. I felt like the baseball scenes were decent, but what really kind of negative made this movie a negative for me was the interaction between Jackie Robinson and the racist managers or other ball players. It was just too cartoonish. And in fact, when we finished watching this movie, my wife turned to me and said, "That movie was made by a white person, wasn't it?" And it turned out it was written and directed by a white writer director. And I just think that it missed an opportunity to show the more nuanced version of the kind of non overt racism that he would have dealt with on a day to day basis because it spent too much time with these characters who were just way, way on the other side of absolutely over the top. So that's where my opinion starts on this movie. But Chike, what did you think of 42?
So, when I first saw this movie in the theater ages ago, I thought it was completely revelatory in terms of the restraint you mentioned that Chadwick Boseman shows throughout the entire movie. There's an earnestness to it. You want to believe and you want to support Jackie as he's making his way up. And it's a great portrayal of someone who is fighting through injustice. Having said that, it happens so often that you're just like, man, cut this dude a break or at least let him be angry.
What'd you think of the one scene where he was allowed to show his anger? The one where he bashed his bat against the walls of the tunnel.
I was happy with that because that was the only way he could really truly express it. I think the thing that bothered me, but also made me more aware, was the racism of the teammates and how they all slowly, very slowly, started to come around when they started to notice how good he actually was and valued, I guess, his playing, regardless of what they were not valuing in him as a person.
Right.
So those were all interesting aspects to me. I will say this: I've seen Harrison Ford in a lot of movies, a lot of movies, and this to me is always going to be his best performance
Hmm.
because he gets to be his gruff, growly self, but he gets to show the heart that you would find in, I hate to say it, but the Star Wars movies. Like that's very present within the baseball manager character that he plays, and it makes him earnest and a powerful figure in Jackie's life that you're more and more curious about the more you watch the movie. So his performance excels just as much as Chadwick Boseman's, and Chadwick hadn't been in a major feature film before this. I don't believe not a studio picture at least.
Right. Right.
Um, and he took that moment and ran with it and understood the value of history, the value of that person so incredibly well. So I really like this movie the second time around watching it. But again, like you said, I noticed how often the racism hit and how little time was spent with the black community who he was supposed to be having this tremendous impact on. And I
Right.
think that's part of the voice of the movie that is missing.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think I also wish in retrospect that they had dealt more with the his life past that first year. You know, he became even towards the end of his baseball career where I mean, he had a very successful baseball career. But then he became a commentator. He was one of the first African American commentators. He actually went off and ran some businesses and had an important life beyond just breaking the color barrier. And I felt like that would have been a more interesting movie to deal more with the other aspects of his life. I felt like there was actually, and this is ironic for a baseball movie, but there was a little too much baseball in this baseball movie.
Yeah, I agree.
Um, yeah, and then I just felt like parts of this movie were a little too cheesy. I mentioned there's this feel good nature to the baseball movies, and all right, so let me pause here and just kind of take a very quick tangent.
Yeah, of course.
One of my favorite movies when I was growing up was The Natural with Robert Redford.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until later that I read the book, The Natural, that I realized that they had changed the ending to be an upbeat ending for the movie. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that kind of ruined baseball movies for me because there's always this inevitable thing about that player has to hit the home run in the final inning to win the game and make the, whatever. it doesn't have to be that way. I mean, you can have an excellent story and not wind up with some, some guy at the plate having, to
Having the career moment of
yeah.
his life.
Yeah, so I wish this movie had been more of a biopic and less of a baseball movie. I read at one point Spike Lee was attached to this in the 90s. And I feel like Spike Lee's version of this would have been a lot more interesting than what we wound up with in 42.
He would have made it about the neighborhood, but also, the prejudice faced day to day.
Right.
And he probably would have shown the businesses that Jackie was a part of and him being an announcer and made it a full scope film. So I'm sad we didn't get to see that vision.
Yeah. So, but I mean, going back to, we watched this movie because of Chadwick Boseman. I mean, obviously his passing was tragic and this being Black History Month. So his performance is strong. I mean, but it's strong in an understated way. And that in some ways is even more impressive than, doing an over the top performance. And I just think that, if this is a very impressive opening into how he could lead a movie, but lead a movie without being, just over the top on it. Although maybe that's a good point to segue to our second film.
Yeah. If you want to talk about performances that shine a light on something different, then Get On Up might just be your bag. Get On Up is the biopic of Godfather of Soul, James Brown, the grandfather of funk, James Brown. Um, and to tell you this story, I'm going to do something the movie didn't. I'm going to go in sequential order.
Mm.
The movie basically revolves around James Brown. He's living in a cottage. I guess his parents, in my opinion, his parents must be, because they don't hint at this at all, freed slaves, because they live remotely outside of the city of uh, the city in the state of Georgia.
Yeah, they were a little too young to maybe be directly freed slaves, but maybe the children of freed slaves.
Maybe
But
the children of freed
yeah,
slaves.
yeah.
And the mother, uh, we can say that she's a homemaker at first, but she becomes a lady of the night. And the father is wanting to go into the army. It's not really all made clear for that. Um, and James discovers through running away from his father due to abuse the church, which leads him to the pastor, who's doing these magical, dance moves that get James in tune with music. And then we fast forward to him, you know, stealing a blazer from a car, getting caught by the police, being put in jail, then hearing a performance of a band in jail, realizing that, that brings him back to his love of music, and then eventually convincing one of the lead members of that band to let him stay with them, which, okay, insane. Major problem there. Not only that, but you basically are. I'm sorry, audience, I have to say this. You're boning his sister 10 minutes into living there. From there, they form a group, the Famous Flames, and it's clear that James is a standout. From that, a record company gets interested, and they want to make it James Brown and the Famous Flames, and most of the Famous Flames quit, except for the person who got him into the band in the first place. He sticks around in kind of a advisory announcer host role for a lot of James Brown's upward trajectory in the music industry, leading him to be famous and make all this money and be kind of impractical for the rest of the film. I'm gonna be blunt about this. Critic hat on now.
All right.
I hate this movie.
All
I
right.
hate this. I hate this movie so much. Um, the organizational structure in which the story is told is level one bothersome to me. Like, you can't get any worse in terms of filmmaking and filmmaking school. I'm not saying it has to be told in order for it to be successful. I'm saying major chunks of the movie are either brought up and then completely ignored, or brought up and then left out to the very last minute. And it's painful for me. I'll give a very clear example. At some point, James Brown's mother leaves him. We assume to basically start a new life because she was threatened with a gun by James's father. We later, at some point in James's life, when he's already successful, see the mother again, and she is well dressed, not as young, but proud of her boy. They're about to have a conversation we do not see until the final tenth of the movie. One that results in him kicking her out. That is not good storytelling. That is not solid story structure. That doesn't lean us into caring about a character. And in fact, at one point watching this movie, I developed a small form of PTSD. And I'm going to specifically talk to the audience about this scene because it's crucial. During a Christmas celebration where James Brown is literally handing out $100 bills, he talks to these kids and he's handing it to black kids, white kids, whatever kids will be in his yard. James Brown goes in to get some refreshments. His wife joins him. They're all happy and gleeful. And out of nowhere, he hits her in the face. Audience, I know that James Brown has been uh, allegedly said to have abused the women he's been in a relationship, but this literally happens one time at about the halfway mark. And after that one time, every time he gets angry, I'm afraid he's going to hit someone. Audience, guess what happens? He doesn't. At any given time, get physical with another person in that movie. It's insane. It's inconsistent. If you want to portray the bad parts of a person's personality, you don't just show it once. You show it in other small ways. Maybe the way you frame a situation in a room, maybe the way you show specific shots of different things in a room. Something to give us a hint that the man is really deeply emotionally disturbed. You get that hint from his father multiple times. You get the hint from the mother multiple times. But you don't get it from him, from his perspective, or from the way the band members react to him. They just think he's, really high on the music. And eventually they respect him for it. But they're never afraid of him going toe to toe with them at any given point. This movie is an absolute and utter car crash, and the only thing that saves it from being absolute dog crap is Chadwick Boseman's believable performance as the Godfather of Soul and every bit of emotion he puts into it. Might I say, this is the first time he acted with Viola Davis. And they don't even really share that much screen time together, and it's still electric to watch. This
Right.
movie is a car crash. I don't recommend you see it. I can say that confidently. But Sanford, you might have another opinion. What do you think of Get On Up?
I do have a different opinion. So this is my second time seeing Get On Up. And I saw it, I don't know, let's say like 6 or 7 years ago before Chadwick Boseman was Chadwick Boseman. I remember being really struck by his performance at the time when I saw it. And, and watching it again now, look, I mean, I like the disconnected nature of the storytelling. I like the fact that they just did not do a linear story. I do agree with you that I felt like The one part of James Brown that they really did not spend enough time with was the dark side. Because although they allude to it in the opening scene where he is an older version, where Chadwick Boseman is playing an older version of James Brown, this is when he got in trouble by with the law and actually wound up in prison. There was a serious downward spiral of his life for about 20 years in the late 70s, 80s, and early 90s, where he was involved with drugs and doing all kinds of, bad stuff. And I felt like they glossed over that. And I think that you're right that that one instance in the movie of him hitting his wife and getting angry with her for really a very minor thing was out of, it was not in character with the rest of the movie because the rest of the movie spent too much time on his success. But those scenes of his success, I mean, the music scenes, the dance scenes, the performance scenes are fabulous. I really enjoy Chadwick Boseman as James Brown. Now, I mean, the dancing, the physicality is amazing. And, this is one of those things that you need to give full credit to Chadwick Boseman for preparing for this role and learning all those moves and just embodying, and not just the young James Brown who you believe in the way he walks, the way he carries himself, but also the older James Brown when he was playing him in his 50s. He had this sort of tired knees walk to him that was really
Yeah.
impressive. I mean, this is a great performance. And I don't mind the storytelling nature of the film. I agree with you. It's not the best version of his life, but I like the way that they've told it back and forth through time. Now, you brought up the scene with his mother. I mean, I think you do need to reference, there's context to that scene with his mother that's told in the scene where when he was a child, she, did not recognize, or she chose not to recognize him.
Yes, but that
Right.
doesn't happen until three-fourths of the way through the film, though.
True, true. But I mean, it's a moment of high drama, and by telling his story out of order, they're able to place it near the end of the film where some high drama should occur. So I don't really mind that. I don't mind the disconnected nature of the storytelling. Um, I just feel like the rest of the movie is worth it. I do wish that they had maybe they really, and sometimes this is good and sometimes this is bad. This movie, unlike 42, this movie chose to just kind of gloss over big events like him getting married or having kids or things like that. You're just basically alluded to very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
All of a sudden it's like, oh, he sees a woman, and then the very next scene they just imply that the whole courtship has ended and they're already married. So I don't have a problem with that, but it does make it a difficult watch because there's a certain sense of, wait, who's this person? And what's going on? But they really spend a lot of time on his relationship with Bobby.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good choice because it's an interesting relationship. But one thing that they didn't tell enough of is Bobby's side of the story. I, you know,
Yeah,
I.
but
Uh, so anyway, to me, those are some minor quibbles because I enjoyed this movie a lot more apparently than you did.
it's I hate it for the fact that there are pieces missing or they come so late within the overall arc you have to literally remember, oh wait, what happened
Yeah.
45 minutes ago that links it to that? Oh, that happened? Oh shoot, now we're finally learning this? Like, I'm usually fine with that, but they leave it so long and they show you so much other stuff that is either meaningful to who he was or meaningful to who he is now that you're just like, I'm okay. You could have just told us that right after you told us the one thing, or you could have included that bit where his mother rejects him, right after he moves in with Octavia Spencer, which that's the other fascinating part of the story that nobody references throughout the entire film. He basically grew up in a whorehouse. So there's no reference to that after he gets famous. There's no reference to what made him such a lady killer. He just is one. There's no reference to how he truly developed singing. The
which
only reference we get to dancing is the church.
right. I mean, honestly, but what's interesting, I always like to do a little fact checking on these things. That's real. I mean, he wasn't trained as a singer. He wasn't trained as a dancer. He figured all that stuff out on his own. And as he alludes to in the movie when he answers a question, I mean, his music is James Brown music. And I think, I've been a James Brown fan since the 80s, so I could say this. I don't think anybody is still able to play James Brown music except James Brown. Even in this movie, although Chadwick Boseman did the dancing, the vocals when he was doing those performances were all real James Brown vocals because nobody can do James Brown music like James Brown.
I see your point.
Yeah.
I
Hey,
mean, I might eventually soften on the movie,
yeah. Talk to me.
but it's not going to happen right away.
Yeah.
And I still love Chadwick Boseman's performance.
Yeah.
Just giving it everything and nailing every single piece of it.
Yeah, I mean, this performance, especially when you compare it to 42, is just like, wow. I mean, but look, he's great in both of them, but it's just two incredibly different performances. One is so restrained and withheld, and one is just out there and, hey, I'm James Brown, and this is my life. And I'm really impressed. This is a nice double feature that you chose because it's a great way to contrast two completely different performances by the same talented actor.
And I think when as time progresses, uh, his memory will live on through these amazing people that he chose to embody. He chose to be uh, an actor that embodied important people in history, and now he is part of that amazing history, which is, I think, all an actor really ever wants is to validate the story of another artist or, you know, storyteller or non famous person, just a person who's done good. And he did that over and over throughout his career. So it's good to take the time to spotlight what he has done. Now, next week, we will be talking about a Black Panther of sorts. So that will be our final dip into Black History Month, or maybe penultimate. We'll see what time allows. Uh, and we will see you next time on Real Reviews Home Edition. Stay cool, everybody.